Thank you.
So just a few announcements. We have classes here every morning. For those that don't know, Monday is Maimonides, Tuesday is Everyday Ethics, Wednesday is Historical Sketches, Thursday is Jewish Psychology, Friday is Kabbalah and Meditation. That's tomorrow. Friday afternoon at 12:15 we have the challah baking class. Saturday morning, 9:30 we have services followed by a Kiddush. This week we actually have a deluxe Kiddush for those that want to join us, including bagel and lox. If you're going to be here next week, Wednesday next week, we're going to have a comedy show here, stand-up comedy show by an Israeli comedian, actually speaking for the institution at 1 o'clock that day. And then at 4 o'clock, he's going to do actually a comedy show, not just talk about comedy, but hopefully get us, loosen up a little bit. So that's Wednesday. If you're going to be later in the season, August 8th, and if you want to put on your calendar, we're going to have a klezmer concert as well. Okay, so Jewish psychology. Any psychologists in the room? Huh? No? You sure? So I'm going to make a little disclaimer, of course, that I'm not a trained therapist. I'm a trained rabbi, obviously in the capacity of, you know what a rabbi is? A rabbi is a free therapist. So we're not talking about situations of, where you need professional help. Obviously for that, we have a Rolodex of references and recommendations, but we're talking about more of a self-help approach to kind of things. And so what I want to talk about today is the concept of relationships. Okay? And I know when I say relationships, many people think it means, marriage relationships. I don't mean marriage. I mean all types of relationships. We can speak about marriage relationships. We can talk about parent-child relationships. We can talk about sibling relationships. We can talk about friends, colleagues, between man and God. It's really across the board. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. Because if I were to ask you, what is the most, not just basic, but actually the most vital human need after food and drink? What would the answer be? I mean, I sort of gave away the answer I wanted to say, but what is the answer that you think would be?
Connection with others.
Relationships, right? That would be the answer. The hardest thing for a human being to experience is loneliness. Loneliness. I think you could say this across the board. I'm going to say this loosely without having any data in front of me. But the reason that people are suicidal is because they feel alone in their pain. No one understands them, or they can't share it with anybody. Nobody believes them. They're suffering alone. And when you have a human being that is wired for relationships, I wasn't giving you a bill.
That comes later.
Thank you. That was the invoice, not the bill. So when you deprive somebody of such a vital needs, it's very hard to live. And so I want to talk a little bit about it. Okay, so that will be the topic of today. I know you thought we're talking Jewish psychology. I'm going to talk about guilt, but no, I'm not talking about it. So let's look at the source sheet, just to bring out this point, and then we'll move along. What are the key ingredients for a healthy relationship? So, and by the way, I just want to say something before we go further. Here's the paradox. We all crave relationships. We all need relationships. And yet, in some way or the other, all our problems in life are because of relationships. Almost all, I should say. Right? So it's this paradox that we want it, but we're scared of it. We jeopardize ourselves. We get confused by it. we try to create it, to work on it, to develop it, to enhance it. And this is really the fluctuation of life, if you want to say the excitement of life. When you're on the upside, it's exciting. When you're on the downside, it's actually not. So we'll talk a little bit about why this paradox. So if you look at the first source in the sheet, this is taken from Maimonides, from the Guide to Perplexed. It has already been fully explained that man is naturally a social being, that by virtue of his nature, he seeks to form communities. But community doesn't mean, it just means groups, social environments. Man is therefore different from other living beings that are not compelled to combine into communities. And this doesn't just mean familial communities. Think of tribal communities. It's larger than just family. Obviously, family is your first, wall of defense, if you want to call it, but it's really beyond that. The same idea that we are wired for relationships and it's a vital need is actually found at the beginning of Genesis, although not so apparent, but as we'll see in a second. So God creates man, and this is Genesis 2:7. This is number 2 on the sheet. And the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living soul. Okay, so there's the body, there's the soul, God breathing in the soul of life, it's so to speak a part of God. The soul of life is a divine soul, and man became a living soul. Obviously, if you breathe in a soul of life into the body, you become a living soul. I mean, you ever heard of a dead soul? Apathetic soul, but not really a dead soul, right? So what is this repetition? Repetition seems to give definition to what this soul of God that we possess, what is it? So the Targum is, if you look in the Hebrew Bible, not the scroll, but the actual printed version, in almost all editions, you're going to find scripture. That's the main column, but on the side, you're going to find the Targum. Targum is the translation in Aramaic, which was translated in Mishnaic times, which is the 1st century, into Aramaic. That was the translation. And so there are actually 3 Targums, but the one that we have on the side is called Targum Onkelos. And then at the bottom, most of them, you're going to have Rashi's commentary, Shlomo Yitzchak's commentary. But this is not a commentary. This is a translation into Aramaic, which was, again, as I mentioned yesterday, this was 2 days ago, this was the sort of like the Yiddish of the time. It was the Jewish adaptation language of the time. So, and it gives a lot of insight of how to understand the text. Again, it's a translation, so it's one translation, but it's an authoritative translation. So in the Aramaic, when he translates a living soul, he actually translates, and man became a speaking soul. Ruach memalala, a spirit of words, of speaking. And what's interesting, Rashi, which is the commentary, Rashi is the basic, literal commentary on the text, says something similar, although he adds another point, which we'll talk about. A living soul, cattle and beasts were also called living souls. But this one of man is the most alive of them all. What makes us more alive, more soul? Because he was additionally given intelligence and speech. So now if I were to ask you, between the two, which one makes us human? Which quality makes us, if you want to say, better than the animal kingdom? Intelligence or speech?
Speech.
Why do you say speech? Because you like talking, but no, but really, why?
Communicate.
Communication. What did you want to say?
I would say intelligence because animals communicate. And even if you said they don't communicate, well, then what happens if you saw an animal, learn to communicate with it, or spoke to each other, or whatever. Presumably it's intelligence, although that can also be suspect because in a lot of ways certain animals can be as smart or smarter than humans too with that. But presumably the two, I think, is the intelligence.
So you say intelligence, you say speech. Yes.
I say it's the combination because it's in communicating through speech, the intelligence of past and future that makes us different from animals who think only in the present and communicate in the present. So they think and communicate around danger, food, you, me, present. We think like, hey, if we band together, we can do such and so later. So that thinking about it and communicating it is what makes like one group invade another group, or one group decide to, develop at the shore of a certain area because it has natural protection, or that thinking about it and communicating it. And then it gives rise to a leader who can think and communicate and then build more people. And that's, I think.
So you're speaking about communication in the sense of community.
Right,
Okay.
that you can think into the future, use your intelligence into the future, and then communicating that thought to other humans who listen and understand that, and then act in accordance with
So
that.
when you said communication, do you mean what she's saying? It's a form of protection and security. Is that what you meant when you said communication?
No,
No. What did you mean when I knew you didn't mean that. What did you mean when you said communication?
getting your ideas when.
Oh, that is similar to what she's saying. It's just to bring the intelligence to others, and so that you can benefit from each other. But
expressing oneself.
But why is that? What's advantageous about that? Why does that make us human? What's so special and significant about it?
Influence others.
Influence others. Okay, that's similar to what you'll see in a second. It's similar, so you are similar to what you're saying. Okay.
But what I think that speech also does is it allows the linkage of generations. It links it. So as we are talking about words that were spoken thousands of years ago, that some dogs, the most intelligent animal cannot have history. And I think that history and relationships are tied to speech.
And what's the importance of that? Not that I'm arguing, I just want to bring
I
up.
think that that's it gives another level to all types of intelligence, because you can learn from history. You can learn that all of the disciplines, everything that you can learn is somehow tied to speech. I mean, not everything, but there's a lot of
There's an advantage to it.
That can be learned only through speech.
So
Or some
let
form of-
me.
or right,
Okay.
Something that comes from speech.
In a way, I mean, this is what you were saying. You were trying to protect your brother, but really, what you're saying is that communication's benefit is that it disseminates intelligence in one form or another. That's really what I'm hearing. In other words, so really, if we had no intelligence to disseminate, then there would really be no advantage to speech in itself. So it's really, I mean, if we're taking this line of thought, it would seem that you're right, that intelligence is really the human advantage. And then the human, in addition to just having intelligence, they have the ability to disseminate it and to really expand it and to grow it. But it's really the human quality is the intelligence. The method, the medium is speech. But no one is saying yet that speech in itself is what makes us uniquely human.
It depends on how you identify speech, because people who are deaf mutes, they use sign language. You can use facial expression. You don't necessarily have to, use words to communicate. So you need the intelligence. It's a combination of both, probably. But intelligence.
I'm not going to get into the halachic Jewish legal status of those that are deaf and mute. Now, that's not. But language, even though we're using the term of speech, has many forms. So that, well, for today's, that's a form of language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, more than just communication signals that animals also use, because it's a whole language. It's words, and it's sentences, and it's intelligent, and it's analytical, and it's and so for now we'll say speech, but we mean all forms of physical expression.
Mhm.
Okay.
It's a stretch because as we learn more and more about science, we realize how much we don't know about other species. And yet I'm convinced that we are, sounds egocentric, but I'm
Speciesism.
yeah, that we are at a higher level. Whales communicate, porpoises communicate, dolphins, things like that. So we don't really know what they're saying. But we have laws and rules. And if they have them, I'm guessing that it's more an intuitive genetic thing that they inherited, whereas we communicate some laws. And before the printed word, I'm seeing that the differences that we have verbal passing down rules and laws, and that's impactful to me. That's something interesting.
Okay, so let me, quick.
Well, so, and the intelligence enables us to have concepts that are universal and to manipulate and build upon those.
Okay, where does
and-
speech come?
And so we're getting, well, mentally,
That's intelligence. So
intellectually.
you're agreeing with him that that's what makes us the human is intelligence.
and to invent, in a sense, concepts.
Okay,
So the imagination enables.
but
us.
that's all intelligence. That's not speech.
Yeah, so.
Okay,
I'm
so you agree
agreeing-
with this. So fine, we have two that agree. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just say the following. You see, based on everything we just said, it's, as I mentioned, intelligence would be what makes us uniquely human. Speech would be a medium. Speech would be whatever you want, methods. But that wouldn't justify calling the human soul the speaking soul. It wouldn't justify saying what makes us unique, what makes us more alive, meaning we want to call it more spiritual, more soul, whatever terminology you want to use, is in the fact that we are intelligent and speech. Why is speech on the same plane as intelligence? So Hasidic philosophy explains that what makes us uniquely human is speech, not intelligence. Now, of course, we're unique with intelligence as well, but that is not the advantage of a human being. The advantage of a human being is actually speech. Now, I know you think that, oh my God, how do I turn off this, right? You have certain people, you just want to turn it on or off. They don't have, the broken radio, you can't turn it in. They're just going on and on and on. So why is that the advantage? Because every faculty that we possess, if you think about it, is egocentric, is self-serving. We have willpower, self-serving. We have pleasure, self-serving. We have intelligence, analytical, ideas, concepts, banding together, secure. It's all self-serving. We have emotional reactions, self-serving, something that's good for you, you want it, something that's dangerous, you retract from it, and so on. Thought is self-serving. You're conscious of what your ideas you can process. The only faculty that we possess that in itself is selfless, is purely for the other. Now, you can use it for yourself, but you don't need it for yourself, is speech, is communication. And the proof to that is animals. The communication that's necessary for survival, animals have as well. They don't have speech. They don't have the formulation of words and sentences that can express my idea with the focus on the other. Not what I can get from it, but what can I give to somebody else? How can I share what I already have? So I don't need it. How can I share that with somebody else? That is the beauty of communication. Right? When there are people that you're in conversation, they never hear you. They're just talking and talking and talking. It's about them. But really, the art of communication is really the art of listening. To say what the other person needs to hear, not what you want to say. Right? So communication is really, in itself, a selfless faculty. And that's what makes us uniquely human, different than any other species on this planet. Every other species is survival of the fittest. It's self-serving. Whatever they do, whatever they have, whatever they engage in, is all about the self in some way or the other. We are able to let go of the self and focus on somebody else. And that's why we're called the spirit of speech. Now, where do we get this idea? Where do we get this from? So what I want to do, again, we spoke about relationships, the importance of it, loneliness, the lack of it. Speech is communicating, having this relationship, which we'll soon see. We'll take some of the ideas and apply it to real relationships. But let's start with using a model. What would be the model that we would use to understand the importance of relationship, the purpose of relationship, and therefore how to cultivate a proper relationship? So usually when we're trying to understand about God, we'll use a human metaphor, because that's what we understand. But today I'm going to do the other way around. To understand human relationships, I'm going to use a metaphor from God. And the reason I'm going to do that, we'll see in a second why. Let's look at the sheet. So number 3, and God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, right? Everybody's familiar with this verse, that we're created in the image of God. Now, I'll get to number A later. That's more marital relationships, the ones that we'll talk about later, analyzing this text. But what we do get from here is that the human being is made in the image of God, which means, first and foremost, the psyche of the person, right? God doesn't have a body, so when you talk about being made in the image of God, the first thing that would come to mind is not the corporeal image, but more the psychic image. Although it does express itself in the physical body as well, because the physical body is the home of the soul, and different parts of the soul are in different parts of the body. So there is a correlation of that as well. But the point we see here is that whatever we experience on a human level is the result of being in the image of God. So therefore, if we examine whatever that should mean, the image of God, it will help us understand the human image. Okay, so in the context of relationship, the same idea. The second source is number 4. And the Lord formed man, we quoted part of this verse earlier, and the Lord formed man, what is man called? Adam, right? Even before he was given a name, Adam, he was called Adam. Man, one of the names of man in Hebrew is Adam. Adam. So, but then he was called Adam as well. And man and God, Lord the God, formed Adam of dust from the ground. How do you say ground? Adama. So the simple reason of why man is called Adam, is because we are essentially earth. We're essentially taken from the ground. Okay, so that's you remember that, you'll always walk around with a sense of humility, that you're just dust. But there's another explanation that's given, and that is 4b. Why is he called Adam? Because he is similar to the one above. The word Adam could mean Adama, could mean earth. It could mean dome, Adame, which means similar, the like of. So why was Adam called Adam? Because he is in the image of God. He is similar to God. And finally, the book of Job, and number 5 on the sheet, and from my flesh, I see God. What does that mean? How do you see from your flesh God? Because again, if you have this awareness that we are a manifestation of the divine image, then you can find God within yourself, and you can find the particulars in that relationship. So therefore, we're going to use the model of our relationship with God and God's relationship with us to understand relationships, purpose, objective, therefore the importance, and then the key ingredients for a healthy relationship. So let's start with the relationship of God. Where did God's relationship begin with us? and even with angels, but we're the real goal of everything. So it started at creation, right? So it's not at creation. What did God use in order to create? What were the tools in his toolbox? That was man. Okay, good. Speech. Right? And God said, let there be, and there was, and God. So it was the metaphor of speech, right? And actually, we spoke last week that on the Shabbat, the 7th day of the week, we rest because God worked for 6 days and he rested on the 7th. And so therefore, we work for 6 days and we rest on the 7th. Could somebody explain to me, is it so difficult, so exhausting, so tiring of saying 10 statements in 6 days and you're just knocked out that you need a day of rest? What does that mean? He worked for 6 days. He said 10 sentences. That's what he said. And he rested on the 7th. What does that mean? So we spoke about Lent last week, but the point being is what we said before. The metaphor of speech is communicating to the other. It's not about reflecting the self. It's not about expressing the self, meaning self-focus. It's the ability to let go of the self and focus on the other. Why did God create the world? What's the purpose? What did he want? Why are we living life and going through all these struggles? What's the objective? So I know what you're going to answer me, to make the world a better place for everybody, for future generations. That's not an answer. But if we don't have a purpose for life, then saying the purpose is enhancing life is not an answer. What are we living? So that we can live. And why are we living? So that we can enhance life. And why are we enhancing life? So that we can give on life. But what's the purpose of living? Nobody answered that question. So there's got to be a purpose for life. And then you could say, we facilitate life to achieve that purpose. So why did God create the world? So we tend to think that he wanted us to be like angels. He wanted us to be the perfect human beings. And oh boy, did he fail, right? But come on, he really made a mistake. If you read the text, it seems like that. You remember the story of the flood, right? God was disappointed. He really made a mistake. Come on. That's not my God. My God doesn't make mistakes. I mean, my wife, she doesn't make. So what does that mean? So that's where the metaphor of speech comes in. God didn't want to create a world that innately, instinctively, naturally reflects him. He had himself. What did he need us to reflect him if we're going to be no different than what he is by himself? The reason God created the world, he wanted there to be another. He wanted to have a relationship. And to have the relationship, you need another, an independent other. Not someone that's God is puppeteering, not someone that God is manipulating, not someone that God is controlling, not someone that is merely created in the image of God and doesn't know and can't do any better or different. God wanted there to be the other. When you have the other, they have independence, they have a sense of self, they have value, they make choices. That's a relationship. Two people coming together. In order to give us free choice, he had to use the metaphor of speech. He had to give us a sense of independence, the other. If creating the world would be all about expressing himself, it would be all about showing off, if you want to call it that, then that's what the world will be. It's merely a reflection of God, and that's it. By using the speech, God in a way became selfless. It's not about me when I'm creating, it's about you. Now, of course, God's the truth, and so now we have to use the free choice to recognize that truth. But that truth comes from ourselves, from within us. We come to that relationship. We're not forced into the relationship. We come willingly into the relationship. And that's why we're given 120 years, because it takes that long to recognize. But what's the downside of free choice? You make mistakes. So by God giving choice, by God creating us as the other, he took a gamble. Possibly up, but more predictably down. It wasn't a mistake. God didn't make a mistake. This was the plan. Up and down, up and down. And that's why relationships are so important. And that's why relationships are so difficult. Important because that's what we're living for. We were created as social beings, other, but with the objective to come back together. But by being other, it has an egotistical side. It has a failing side. It has a struggling side. And so this is the struggle, the ups and downs of life. We're trying to get there. Sometimes we make it. Sometimes we fall back. We get better at it. We get closer. We fall back. That's the reality of relationships. So why are we called the spirit of speech? Because we're reflecting God. In our relationship with him, it was through speech that he created us. It was the selfless act of God that created the world. And we are called speakers because of the quality of selflessness that we possess. That's what makes us uniquely human.
I think when you talk about, that God spoke, and I think this is people speaking too, is that there is a dull, because the way it's understood is that when you say God spoke, it is the most powerful. It's like it has the sense of power, and it's like it's like when somebody says, "Your word is my command," and it's the sense of, and I think that can be part of what human is too, which is that speech maybe ideally is selfless, but it contains the power of our power. When I speak and I want to, it's how you speak, and I can't, to see it as totally selfless, I think is.
You bring up a beautiful point, and the truth, what you just said, which is that it could be abused, could be said about every human faculty, including intelligence. It could be the most constructive thing, and it could be the most destructive thing. So yes, every faculty, and the reason why it's like that is precisely for this reason. If God would have created us in a way that he is apparent in creation, in other words, you would have felt the divinity in every part of creation, there would be no room for failure. There would be no room for sin. There would be no room for negativity, for abuse. It's true. By creating the other, by being selfless, there's a positive side, the positive objective, but there is the negative side. He's at the time concealing himself. You don't see the truth, the divinity, the holiness, the selflessness necessarily in everything in reality. That's the struggle. But it doesn't take away from the fact that inherently what it is selfless. And then we can use something so good, something so selfless in a negative way. It's true. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. So now that we have this, so we spoke about relationships, and we spoke about, we get it from God, and it's. So if we take now speech as the foundation of relationships between God and us, then we need to take the concept of speech in the relationship of humans as well. And it's not just about communication, which is of course an important thing in any relationship. Talking about positive communication, constructive communication, complementary communication, which is also a point to be spoken about. But I want to talk about something more fundamental than that, and that is the selflessness of the communication. And so therefore, if I were to ask you, what is the key ingredient for relationships, what would the answer be?
Trust. Speech.
Trust.
Speech.
Why speech?
Because
Comfort.
that's how you
Communicate.
interact with somebody else,
Okay,
and God too.
so that means that if people can't talk to each other, they can't have a relationship? It makes it easier, I agree, but you could still have a relationship.
Listening?
Listening,
Well, understanding how the other person is seeing and feeling.
which
It's
is
the
listening,
understanding,
which is
which is
listening, and it's a form of
understanding.
what he's saying, trust as well. In other words, the
Yeah.
other person's there for me.
Well,
I think that's what you mean by trust.
oh, I mean.
That you can be yourself and the other person will accept you.
You mean empathy? Empathy for someone else?
So if we take everything that we're saying, and you can probably add another dozen to this, it all boils down to one thing: selfless. That's what it is. And I'm going to share with you a key word, a Hebrew word, which is, taken from Kabbalistic literature, Hasidic philosophy, but it's a word to remember. And that is, if you can remember this, bitul. Bitul. What does bitul mean? Anybody know Hebrew? What does bitul mean? Literally, it means self-nullification, the loss of the sense of self. And this is really the key ingredients to a relationship. And I'm going to explore this a little bit, as much time as we have. But before I do, I want to say the following. This is where we struggle. Selflessness does not equal worthlessness. Selfless does not equal worthless. And really, if you think about it, in any difficult relationship, not I guess every, but if you boil it down in many of the cases, the reason that we're unwilling to be vulnerable, we're unwilling to let go of the selfless, is because we feel challenged. We feel that our sense of self is diminished in some way. It could be in an egotistic way, that's an extreme way, but it's really the struggle, because sometimes we feel if I'm selfless, I'm being abused. And sometimes it might be true, by the way. And that's a separate discussion to examine that, which is true. And if you're in an unhealthy relationship and it's the other partner that's really causing, that's a different discussion. We're not talking about that. Again, remember, we said professional help is not the discussion for today. But if we're able to change ourselves in a relationship, usually the dynamics of relationships change when you change yourself. Definitely 50%. And that already is a change in the dynamics, and it has an effect on the other person. As we'll see soon, some of the text about that. But the reason that we're unwilling to let go of the self in the relationship, the selfless aspect, is because we confuse it with the sense of worthlessness. I'm being trampled on. And that's not the case. Selfless means I'm not being trampled. I have an opinion. I have an identity. I will not allow myself to be abused or hurt in any way or form. Selfless merely means I'm focused on this relationship. What can I give to the other? What does the other need from me? Not what do I need from the other, but what can I give to the other? So therefore, I'm surprised that nobody said this. I was expecting, if I would ask you what the key ingredients, many people, at least maybe because you're older and you figured this out already, the key ingredient many people would say is love. Right? Usually you would say for relationship, doesn't have to be, sexual love. But really, love could be selfish. Love could be about me. Right? What am I gaining? I feel it's about my feelings. Really, the key ingredient, again, putting it in this context of a relationship, and if we talk about marital relationship, it's definitely that way, is commitment. Is commitment. What is commitment? That even when you're not in the mood, and even when you don't feel that you're gaining, you're committed. You're committed to the other. That's selfless. That's selfless.
So the gift of free will then gives us the choice to decide whether we want to put ourselves first in the relationship or focus on the other.
That's correct.
So listening to somebody.
If we wouldn't have free choice,
Mhm.
and we would be selfless, we wouldn't be selfless. Why? No, think about it. If we're selfless because we're programmed that way, then that's not selfless. Then I'm not giving up self. That is the self. Selfless means I have a choice. I have a self. I could be selfish, and I'm letting go. Then you're selfless. So it's the freedom of choice. It's the speech which allows the freedom of choice that enables us to have bitul, real bitul. Now, there could be imposed bitul. That's true. God could take away a sense of self from us. That's true. But the real bitul is when you have a self that you have to give up, that you're willing to give up, that you agree to give up.
Is this where the ego and the soul are separated in our mind and our thinking, where we start to say, my personality wants this, but there's a deeper place in me?
Yeah, or you would say that it's two different souls. There's the divine soul, which is the selfless soul we're talking about now, and then there's the animalistic soul, which is the selfish part of ourselves. Let me just move on a little bit quicker because we're really running out of time, and then we'll ask questions. So, really, if you think about it, you can divide these two relationships into almost, you can say, parent-child, the sibling blood relationships, and friends or spouse relationships. What's the difference between the two? I mean, the first obvious that this is blood. You had no choice in the matter, right? But because you had no choice, it's a blood relationship. In most circumstances, we'll call it, it's called an essential relationship. It's part of who you are. And therefore, it's really unconditional. Now, I'm not saying there can't be unhealthy situations, but generally speaking, it's unconditional. You'll give anything for your sibling, you'll give anything for your parent, you'll give parents for child, definitely. And even if you misbehave, I mean, the prime example would be where a child totally misbehaves and the parents are very upset with them. But if God forbid, in that moment, the child's life is threatened, then everything's thrown out of the window and the parent will do anything to protect their child. If that would have been with somebody else and you're angry at them, then, I'm not saying it's an ethical way of responding, but the natural way of responding is good, right? That's the way we would think. In a parent-child, it doesn't work like that. No, I don't think so, at least. Good. It's everything dissipates because it's selfless. Right? There's the selfless element of it. When we need to foster relationships, well, what's our relationship to the other person? So we need to begin with something in common. What do I have that I feel good about this relationship? So it does start off from a selfish perspective. But if it starts and ends there, then you have problems. Everybody gets in a relationship because of love. But what's the percentage of divorce? 50 is nice. In today's day and age, it's getting worse and worse. Why? Because there's love, there's no commitment. Right? So it's about me, it's not about the other. So you need to start off in a relationship as spouses, you need to start off dependent on a selfish drive in it, of course. But what we're looking to achieve is to have a sibling type relationship. Now, of course, you have still free choice, and therefore, in certain situations, you can break the relationship, and that's called for. Of course, if it's abusive or whatever it should be, siblings can't do that. I mean, you can ignore each other, but you still it's still blood, right? But that's what we're trying to bring into every relationship: this unconditional commitment, this bitul. Now, we don't have time to get into all the sources, but I'll just give you two sources for now, and then I'll finish off with an interesting biblical story that is very troubling, but with today's idea is explained beautifully. Number 6. Now, the wording is, I know some of you will be troubled by the wording of this thing, but put it in perspective, okay? Number 6. It's taken from the ethics of our fathers. This is talking about the relationship of man and God. So Antigno Shisocha would say, do not be as slaves or servants who serve their master for the sake of reward. Rather be as slaves or servants who serve their master not for the sake of reward. Now, what does that mean in other words? Why are we doing what God wants of us? Not for the return on the investment. Now, the return on the investment doesn't have to necessarily be, well, I just asked God for a car, I better go to synagogue and pray today, right? I bet, even if we're talking about, admirable rewards, you're looking to gain a place in heaven. Isn't that a good thing? Right? Yet, it's about yourself. And so therefore, when you're doing what God wants, you're doing what right is, do it because it's right. Do it because, without anything in the return. So that's between man and God. And the same thing as human relationships. This is number 7. Any love that's dependent on something, when the thing ceases, the love also ceases. But a love that is not dependent on anything never ceases. And the examples, they give 2 examples from scripture. Again, what's this idea? When I'm in the relationship, because it's dependent on something, we have something in common, we share common interests. I'm not even talking about physical attraction. I'm talking about psychic attraction. You like the personality, you enjoy which is all true, and it's all necessary. Ultimately, it's self-serving. And ultimately, therefore, the moment it begins to diminish or weaken, the relationship begins to fall apart. When you have a commitment, what brought us together might have been dependent on these things. But now that we're in it, and again, we're not about to be hurtful, but each one is selfless. What can I do for the other? I'm here to listen. I'm here to trust. I'm here. All these things, that's an enduring relationship. That is the key ingredient. And that's the most difficult thing in life, to be selfless. Because we are a self. We do have an ego. So this is really the ups and downs. And it's fine. You can fall back and come back together. And the contrary, every time you experience self, letting go of the self becomes that much more valuable. So let me finish with, there's a lot more to talk about. We can make maybe a whole week workshop, but just this idea in itself is very powerful. But let me just share with you a biblical story. I didn't quote it on the sheet. There's no space on the sheet, but those that are familiar with Genesis and Abraham and Sarah, anybody familiar? Yeah, this wasn't supposed to be a Hebrew class, but if you look in scripture, you go back to Genesis, I'll tell you the chapter, you can look it up later. It's chapter 12. The famous story where Abraham, there's a hunger in Israel, then called Canaan, and Abraham goes south towards Egypt. Everybody remember the story?
Yeah.
On the way, Abraham says to Sarah, I just realized how beautiful you are. And we're going to a place that can't control themselves when they see beauty. And so I'm worried. So therefore, what I'm asking of you is, because I know what they're going to do is, they're not going to take you if you're married to me. So they might kill me so that you're a widow. And then, right? So therefore, please, I'm asking you, please say you're my sister so that they will do good with me and I will remain alive because of you. This is the story. Remember the story? Very troubling story. I mean, put yourself in that situation with your spouse, even if you're angry at your spouse. That's what you would do. So I saw a beautiful interpretation of the story in the context of what we spoke about today. There is the selfless relationship and there's the selfish relationship, like we spoke about. And generally, two people that don't know each other, they don't have blood relationship, is usually going to be based on a selfish relationship. Sibling relationship, brother, sister, is going to be selfless, is going to be essential, like we said, is not dependent. Okay. And so Abraham is going with Sarah down to Egypt. The word in Hebrew for Egypt is Mitzrayim. What does Mitzrayim mean? Egypt. But the root of the word Mitzrayim is Metzar, which means narrowness, confinement, limitation. So therefore, even when in any relationship, there are times of expansion, high ground, and times of limitation, times of low ground, time of passion, time of apathy. We all go through this. We're in the land of Israel, the Holy Land, and then we go down to the land of of Egypt. This is, we go through this up and down of life. And so as Abraham metaphorically was coming down to Egypt, he was experiencing in the relationship that the glue that held us together is beginning to fall apart, which was expressed that I realize that you're beautiful. In other words, it's not about the essential relationship, it's about your beauty. He realized there's a problem. If our relationship is not absolute, if it's based on something and the thing that it's based on diminishes, like we said, so then the relationship is going to diminish. We need to fall back to something deeper. We need to awaken the commitment. We need to awaken the sibling type of relationship. So when they were coming down to Egypt, again, metaphorically, there was friction in the relationship, limitation in the passion and the feeling. In what brought them together, it became external, the beauty. He said to Sarah, please say that I am your brother and you're my sister. Let's focus on a different type of relationship, a sibling relationship. And only that will save us. Only that will rekindle and keep us together. I thought that's a very beautiful interpretation, but it plays into what we spoke about today, that's the key ingredient to a relationship. So I left you with one concept, but really it's a lifelong journey really to master that. And it plays out in many different things. And it doesn't have to be extreme things. You don't have to think selfless means, okay, I'm going to sign away everything. No. It could be the little acts, but you're doing them for the other person. The way you're doing it, you can do the same thing, but the way you're doing it. Are you doing it out of rote? Are you doing it out of obligation? Are you doing it, I don't want to do it, but I got to do this? Or is it selfless? Is it about them in mind and how it's going to make them feel and what it's going to do for them? So it doesn't have to be, magnificent and extraordinary kind of things. It could be small little acts, but with a selfless motivation. That's what creates a healthy relationship in any environment. And again, we're not talking about abusive situations, and that's different. Okay, I think we'll stop over here for now. If anybody has any questions. Yes.
Just in the sense that.
By the way, one second, if you didn't register yet, we have the QR code, just you can scan it with your phone and just register. And also we have the charity basket if you want to pass it around.
That even the ending of a relationship might not be the ending of a relationship, but a new definition of that gives the space for the other person to be
A different kind of relationship, yeah.
yes, but and it may be just very abstract.
Yeah.
But it still is a relationship. You haven't broken the relationship.
Right.
It's just each has honored the
Sure.
other's freedom.
Right. I mean, it could come across in many ways. Anytime you have to discipline a child, the child feels, I hate you, mommy, I hate you, tati, you don't love me anymore, right? They feel that you severed the relationship. How can you do this to me? But it's really another form of relationship. Yes.
Just to summarize, were you saying earlier, when you were saying, what's the purpose of life? Why were we here, right? Were you saying the answer to that question was that quality of selflessness?
Yes. In other words, God gave us this ability to find the truth, and the truth is larger than ourselves, by our own free will. So to really be selfless, to really let go of the self, you have to first have a self to let go. So therefore we think, and maybe I should say this too, it's counterintuitive. We think that the struggles of relationship is, the relationship is falling apart. On the contrary, it's what causes those struggles, because we have a self. We have an identity. If we didn't have an identity, there would be no relationship. You can't have a relationship with the chair. What do you mean? The chair will do exactly what I told it to do. That's not a relationship. So there has to be the self, the independence, the choices, the free choices, and then each on their own come together. But when you have that, you have the ability of friction. So what makes the relationship so difficult is what ultimately makes the relationship so beautiful. So The purpose of life is to find that beauty. Find that beauty with God, to find that beauty with each other. And to connect that, what we said earlier in the week, to find it with God is to do mitzvot, but to do mitzvot on our own free will, not to feel that we're forced, which means force would mean I'm going to get punished or I'll get rewarded. That's not your own free will. I mean, if sometimes you have to do it that way. I mean, you don't tell a child when you'll want, then you'll do certain. Of course, sometimes you need it, but that's not the objective. The objective is that you come from your own free will. You should appreciate the truth of it and do it because you have a relationship, and therefore you want to do for the other what the other wants. You know, there's a story that somebody became, I don't know if you know, Baal Tshuva. They became religious. If you come from a non-religious, they became religious. And they were getting married. And the custom in our community is that before you get married, you had an opportunity to go into a private audience with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, to get his blessing and guidance. And that was a unique opportunity to be able to do that. And it wasn't just the bride and groom that went in, it was the family, both in-laws. But the in-laws weren't religious and didn't appreciate the value of having this private audience. But out of respect for the children, they said they'll come along. So before you go in, you went into there was an outer office, the secretaries, and they would sort of guide you of proper conduct of what you do. And the way was you write whatever questions or dilemmas or blessings that you want or prayers on a note, so you don't have to, waste the Rebbe's time. You would read it very quickly, and you present it, and then the Rebbe would respond. So they told him, this is what you do before you go in. You write what's called in Yiddish a zettel, a note. So one of the in-laws says, I just came for them. I didn't come because I have any questions or that. I don't believe in this whole system. So nothing for me to write. But they said, look, that's the conduct, that's the normal way. So write whatever you want. I mean, just, okay. So he wrote. What was the question that he wrote? His issue with religion. Right? Here you come into the religious rabbi. Excuse me. So issue with, what was his issue? He said, I don't understand. In Judaism, there's laws of kosher. One of the laws of kosher, you're not allowed to mix fleishik and milk. You're not allowed to mix milk, dairy, and meat. Right? And so what happens if you have a dairy spoon, a spoon that was used for dairy? We have two separate sides of the kitchen, right? Two separate dishes. What happens if a dairy spoon, a spoon that was there, falls into a meat pot, and then you use the spoon, you're not supposed to use it, it's a sin, a transgression. He says, I don't understand. God is so great, so infinite. He really cares if I use a milchik spoon that fell into a fleishik pot, a dairy spoon. Come on. That was his question. Good question. The Rebbe reads the note, and the Rebbe looks at him, and the Rebbe says, God doesn't care if it's a dairy spoon. That's not the reason why. He said the reason why is because God wants a relationship with you and me. And a relationship, imagine God said, I want a relationship, but it's going to be on my terms. God would expect of us infinity. Things that are beyond our capability. God said, I want a relationship with you, therefore I'm going to ask of you small things that in your own little world, what's the big deal? It's not about the spoon, it's about the relationship. That's what a mitzvah is. It's about a relationship. So we get stuck, don't tell me what to do. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm affording you an opportunity to have a relationship with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.